All right, so this morning we are going to talk about a figure in the Old Testament that's known as the angel of the Lord and unpack what that phrase means, which is kind of a unique phrase. It identifies an individual angel different than all the other angels that we run across in the scriptures. To bring us up to speed, I want to do a quick review. I don't know that I'll do this every week, but so far it has been helpful to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about, to kind of go back and then bring us up. And so today we are going to review again some of what we have talked about before. And this week that begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And in each realm, he also created imagers to be his representatives, to rule in his name, as it were. In the heavens, these imagers are the Elohim, or the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, or the sons of the Elohim. As we learned, the son of phrasing in the scriptures just means that you bear a commonality with whatever is being described. And so like the sons of the prophets are called that because they have a prophetic ability, because they speak for God, not because they're necessarily the literal son of a prophet, but that they have this in common. So the same kind of phrasing applies for the sons of the Elohim. They are in this category of Elohim. And on earth, he created humanity, who, after our first parents, we are called the sons of Adam, the B'nai Ha-Adam, the sons of Adam, because we all have that quality. We are the sons of Adam that God created on earth to be his imagers. In the image of God, God created us. And these two realms, if you will, heaven and earth, had a common point where they touched in God's first creation in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, there were man and woman, Adam and Eve, living in the garden, but there were also God in the garden. And I suggested last week that the serpent that we meet near the tree was actually one of these Elohim as well, a guardian Elohim called a seraph, one of the seraphim in heaven. And we know that in Eden, these spiritual beings that we normally can't see with our fleshly eyes had some kind of tangible existence, because Adam and Eve could talk to the serpent could talk to them, they saw the serpent. There was some kind of physical presence there for this serpent next to the tree. Well, it may be surprising, but Scripture basically records the same kind of physical presence in the garden for God himself. Now, after the temptation and after Adam and Eve eat the the fruit, we have this description in Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. Then they heard the sound of Yahweh God walking in the garden in the windy time of day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh God among the trees in the garden. And Yahweh God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" Well, how does God walk if he doesn't have legs and feet? The whole walking picture is of a human figure walking in the garden. How does he speak if he doesn't have a mouth? How does Adam and Eve hear a voice if there's not a mouth speaking to them? How do Adam and Eve think they can hide from God unless God is in some kind of location where he cannot see them? So this whole picture, like the serpent, an Elohim that was embodied as a serpent and visible to Adam and Eve, here we have God himself embodied as a man walking through the garden and looking for Adam and Eve and calling out to them. Now we know that when God finds them, and they're not able to hide from God, God discovers them, and that conversation doesn't go very well throughout the rest of chapter 3. It is a curse for the disobedience, for eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we know that the Elohim, at least some of them, rebelled. Not just the one serpent, but more groups of them in chapter 6 of Genesis and Genesis chapter 3. We saw this unfolding, continuing rebellion from God's imagers refusing to properly image God, instead rebelling. And after chapter 11 and the Tower of Babel and the rebellion at that point, God had assigned Elohim to the nations to lead them. But even those Elohim that were assigned to the nations rebelled and took the praise and worship of the people for themselves, refused to properly acknowledge Yahweh and to point the nations to him, and instead inserted themselves as gods over the nations. And we know that these Elohim did this from phrases like what we see in Exodus chapter 5. Exodus chapter 5, first couple of verses read this way. And afterward, Moses and Aaron went, and they said to Pharaoh, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, release my people so that they may hold a festival for me in the desert." And Pharaoh said, "Who is Yahweh, that I should listen to his voice and release Israel? I do not know Yahweh, and also I will not release Israel." This is a condemnation of the gods of Egypt for failing to tell Pharaoh, to reveal to Pharaoh the truth about Yahweh God. This shows us that these gods of Egypt, whom they'd called Ra or Horus or Set, whatever these gods were, they weren't properly elevating Yahweh, so that Pharaoh didn't know who Yahweh was and didn't respect him. That's the core. Ignorance of Yahweh is bad enough, but then just to disrespect him and say, "No, I'm not going to do what Yahweh asks me to do. I don't know anything about him." This is worse than not knowing anything about Joseph. Remember, Exodus starts with the Pharaoh who rises that doesn't know Joseph. Well, not knowing Joseph is pretty bad. Not knowing Yahweh, that's the worst. And this Pharaoh doesn't. And a lot of what we see following in Exodus, with the plagues on Egypt eventually, when Pharaoh continues to refuse to let the Israelites go, is kind of a correction to this ignorance of Pharaoh, to teach him who Yahweh is, and incidentally, to teach the reader who Yahweh is by reading about these stories, and to teach the nations who Yahweh is, so that when the nations see what's happening in Egypt, they learn a lesson, and we know they did learn that lesson down the road when Joshua is leading the people into the promised land, and they encounter Rahab and Jericho. Rahab says, "We heard about what happened in Egypt. We know Yahweh, and we know his power, and the people of Jericho are afraid because of that." So the whole Exodus narrative is about teaching who Yahweh is to Pharaoh, to the Egyptians, to the Egyptian gods, who apparently need to learn their place, and even to the nations around. They need to know the name of the Lord and respect it. Well, we know that God had designated these unfaithful Elohim to all the nations, but we ended with a note of hope. Speaking here of the God of Israel, after the Tower of Babel, God decided he would create his own nation, his own inheritance that would be his, and he would work with them so they would know who Yahweh was, and he would continue to have a personal, intimate communication route through this one nation that started with Abraham. In Genesis 12, that's when God begins the process to create the nation of Israel by first working with Abraham. And so Yahweh continue to appear to Abraham as he had to Adam and Eve in the garden, as he had to Noah, to these antediluvian patriarchs. He continued to appear to Abraham. And we see one example of that. There are actually several, but the one example I wanted to share with us this morning comes from Genesis chapter 18. I'm going to quote this one at length because I think it has some interesting details to it. In Genesis 18, first 3 verses, Yahweh appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, and he was sitting in the doorway of the tent at the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing near him. And he saw them and ran from the doorway of the tent to meet them. And he bowed down to the ground, and he said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass by your servant." So here again, Yahweh appears to Abraham as one of 3 men who come up to Abraham. And I read that as if they kind of like surprise him. Like Abraham's maybe lost in thought, sitting under the tree in the heat of the day, maybe drowsy because it's hot outside. And he suddenly looks around and there are 3 guys just standing right there. Like, where did you come from? They appeared. And they start talking to Abraham, and he wants to show them hospitality. A very key virtue in the ancient world. And so he says, please don't pass by. Wait here so I can show you some hospitality on the way, which of course they do. Skipping down a little bit, we read a discussion between Yahweh and Abraham that to me reads kind of like a divine council meeting. We talked about the divine council was a decision-making body of Elohim where God would announce his intention, and then the Elohim would give input as to how that might be executed in real time on the earth. Well, with that background in mind, listen to what Abraham and Yahweh discuss. Verses 17 through 21. Then Yahweh said, "Shall I conceal from Abraham what I'm going to do? Abraham will surely become a great and strong nation, and all the nations on the earth will be blessed on account of him. For I have chosen him that he will command his children and his household after him, that they will keep the way of Yahweh to do righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he said to him." Then Yahweh said, "Because the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very serious, I will go down and I will see. Have they done altogether according to its cry of distress, which has come to me? If not, I will know." And we talked about how those 2 other angels that were with God were like those watchers that go down to the city to report back to Yahweh, is the outcry legitimate against these 2 cities? Have they been doing what has been complained about them? And he's going to discover that. Well, the discussion continues. The men turned from there and went toward Sodom. That's the 2 other men that were with the Yahweh figure. And Abraham was still standing before Yahweh. And Abraham drew near to Yahweh and said, "Will you also sweep away the righteous with the wicked? If perhaps there are 50 righteous in the midst of the city, will you also sweep them away and not forgive the place on account of the 50 righteous in her midst? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to kill the righteous with the wicked, that the righteous would be as the wicked? Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do justice?" I think it's interesting. God had just said, "I choose Abraham, and you're going to be holding up justice in you and your family. You're going to train them in this." And then immediately, Abraham is like, "We want to talk about justice? Let's think about what is happening with Sodom and Gomorrah. How would we apply justice to that situation? What about if there were 50 men there?" And he asked this question. Well, Yahweh said, "If I find 50 righteous in Sodom in the midst of the city, then I will forgive the whole place for their sake." So God modifies the plan, as it were, based on the feedback from Abraham. That is a divine council meeting type of activity. God announces his intention, and a member of the divine council gives feedback on it, and then God decides to incorporate that feedback into his plan. Now we know Abraham gets them all the way down to 10, back and forth, but there are still not 10 in the city. So Sodom and Gomorrah are doomed anyway. But this is like that. So I believe that God wants to incorporate us into his divine counsel. What is prayer if it is not a kind of divine council meeting where we bring our requests to God and he arranges his plans accordingly? It is a part of this process. How amazing is it that we have that access to the Lord to make our requests known to him, as Abraham did in this case, and God takes our requests into account as he makes his plan. Now, he doesn't always change the outcome. Sodom and Gomorrah still got destroyed, but there was still a plan, and God modified his plan based on that request from God, and God opens up the doors to all who are faithful to him to participate in that process. I think that is just one of the amazing things that comes out of seeing how God is working with both the Elohim and us, the sons of Adam. Well, God continues this intimate relationship with the offspring of Abraham. Abraham is only the first part of the process of creating the nation of Israel. The promise would be passed down to the next generation and to the next, and for at least the next 2 generations. We know that God personally appears to each patriarch of Israel. In Genesis chapter 26, verse 2, this is Isaac. Yahweh appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, but dwell in the land which I will show to you." So there was a famine at this point, and that would be the typical thing to go to Egypt. They have a river in Egypt that provides fertility, abundance most of the time. And so Egypt was kind of plan A for any kind of famine situation. And God says, no, don't go to Egypt, go somewhere else. And in the same context, throughout the rest of chapter 26, the next couple of verses, he reiterates the promise that God is going to give Isaac the promise that he had made to Abraham about descendants and a nation and all of that. But he appeared to him. Then he appears to Jacob. And in Jacob's life, we have Yahweh appearing visibly more than one time. But one notable time is here in chapter 28, verses 10 through 13. Then Jacob went out from Beersheba and went to Haran. And he arrived at a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and slept at that place. And he dreamed, and behold, a stairway was set on the earth, and its top touched the heavens. And behold, angels of God were going up and going down on it. And behold, Yahweh was standing beside him. And he said, "I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you were sleeping I will give to you and to your descendants."
If I was laying on a rock, I think I would dream too.
Yes. So the dream, and I have seen this dream depicted. It's one of these famous scenes from the Old Testament that gets artistic treatment in the Grand Masters and others. I don't remember the placement of Yahweh, but it seems like he's usually at the top of the ladder. And we would imagine if there's a ladder going to heaven and angels going up and down on it, where would God normally be? At the top of the ladder in heaven? Is that where he is? No. He is right beside Jacob, standing right there. Standing on 2 feet next to Jacob and talking to him. So we have again an embodiment of Yahweh speaking to Jacob and affirming his promise to him. At the end of Jacob's life, Joseph has already saved Egypt from famine by interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, and he brings the whole family down to Egypt to survive the 7 years of terrible famine that even affect Egypt. And so at the end of Jacob's life, he is in Egypt with Joseph and the other family, and he blesses his children, and he specifically blesses Joseph by blessing his 2 children, treating his grandchildren, Manasseh and Ephraim, as if they were his own immediate children, and blessing them with equal blessings as he had the other 11 children that he had, his sons. And he says something very interesting in that blessing as he's blessing Joseph through Manasseh and Ephraim. Let's look at these verses in Genesis chapter 48, verses 15 and 16. Then he blessed Joseph, saying, "May the God in whose presence my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth until this day, an angel, or the angel, who has saved me from all harm, bless these boys, so that my name will live on in them, and the names of my ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, as well, and that they grow into teeming multitudes on earth." So as he is blessing Manasseh and Ephraim, he refers to God, the God in whose presence Abraham and Isaac walked, obviously Yahweh, the God who has been my shepherd from birth to this day, Yahweh, the angel who has saved me from all harm. An interesting phrase, but it's clear, and the Hebrew grammar supports this by anybody who looks at it. All 3 of these descriptions are of the same one that Jacob is asking to bless Manasseh and Ephraim, these boys. He is asking one person to do it, whom he describes in 3 different ways, one of which way he describes as the angel who has saved me from all harm. That's a little surprising. He would call him an angel, but it isn't the last time that we hear God described as an angel. It may be the first, but it introduces this whole idea of the angel of Yahweh, that there is an angel that is the presence of Yahweh visible to Abraham as a man on a dusty plain under the oaks of Mamre, visible to Isaac when he appeared to him and told him not to go to Egypt, visible to Jacob as he stood beside him by the ladder, a visible embodiment of Yahweh, an angel that is interacting with people in a way that people can see and understand. I mean, if we were ever to see the true glory of God in our human limitations, but see that, I think we would just fall over dead. I mean, literally it says that if somebody in Scripture, if somebody sees God, they will die. And I think it's because the glory of God, it would just be overwhelming. And after all, what would happen if we would die? It would be our spirit leaving the body, wouldn't it? And I think if our spirits ever perceived God and His grandeur, we would just want to leave and be in His presence immediately. So I think death would just be our spirits going back to being with God, leaving our bodies behind, because we want to be in that presence with Him immediately. Well, that's maybe just speculation for why, if we saw God, we would die. But nevertheless, that is what Scripture says. And yet, God does appear to people. So how is it possible that on the one hand, if you see God, you die, but on the other hand, God appears to people? Well, because when He appears, He takes on a form, an appearance of humanity that we can see and understand and interact with. Well, let's look at another example where this angel of Yahweh and Yahweh Himself are mingled together in the description of the biblical writer. We'll move on to Moses next. Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 through 6. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to him, Moses, in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and there was the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not being consumed. And Moses said, "Let me turn aside and see this great sight. Why does the bush not burn up?" And Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, and God called to him from the midst of the bush, and he said, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "You must not come near to here. Take off your sandals from off your feet, because the place on which you are standing, it is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face because he was afraid of looking at God, obviously. So here is, in the opening verse, described as the angel of Yahweh. But later, that same being in the bush says, "I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, Jacob." So God is the angel and Yahweh in this verse. Later on, after Moses brings the people out of Egypt, and they arrive at Sinai, and they are getting ready to move forward from there. I almost hesitate to phrase it that way because we're still looking in Exodus, and we know that they camped at the mountain for like a year. But even before they got to all of that, God had started explaining to Moses what was going to happen after they left Sinai. What are the next steps, literally? What are the next steps that are going to happen when you leave Sinai and go out there? And so in Exodus chapter 23, verses 20 through 22, God's explaining what's going to happen. And he says this, "Look, I'm about to send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Be attentive to him and listen to his voice. Do not rebel against him, because he will not forgive your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you listen attentively to his voice and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes." So here God is promising an angel. But this is not an ordinary angel. This is an angel who speaks, and it's God's voice that you hear. You listen to his voice and do everything I say. There's a complete equivalence between what this angel says and what God says. They are the same thing. So you listen to this angel. He's going to speak for me. He's going to speak as me on your path. Not only that, he has the ability to forgive sin. This angel may forgive your sin, but if you just obstinately refuse to do what he says, he will not forgive your sin. So this forgiveness, the ability to forgive or not forgive, which in Jewish thinking we understand from later writings, the ability to forgive was something only God could do. But this angel can do it, or not do it. And perhaps the one phrase that brings that all together, "My name is in him." In the Jewish thought, a person's name was more than just the word we call them, the proper noun that we use to call them that. A person's name was a reference to their very essence, who they are. And for God to say, "My name is in him," is to so closely identify with this angel that he might as well be saying, "This angel is me. I am going to be with you as this angel on the way to the promised land." So we've seen this angel. I'm going to retroactively describe the embodiment of Yahweh that talked to Abraham, the embodiment of Yahweh that appeared to Isaac and Jacob, as instances of this angel. I think it's legitimate to draw the conclusion that this is Yet the angel of the Lord appeared to Abraham, appeared to Isaac, appeared to Jacob, appeared to Moses, and it doesn't stop there. The angel of the Lord continues to reveal himself. Yahweh reveals himself to key figures throughout the scriptural record of Israel's history. In Judges chapter 6, we continue to see this in the story of Gideon. Look in Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 14. The angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak that was at Ophrah. He must like oaks. I think God just likes oaks. He appeared by the oak of Mamre. Here he's by the oak of Ophrah.
Oak is a hardwood.
It is a hardwood. A very majestic tree, appropriate for the angel of Yahweh. This one belonged to Jehoash the Abiezrite, and Gideon, his son, was threshing wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. The angel of Yahweh appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, you mighty warrior. Hiding in the winepress, but that's a nice Bible story. Well, Gideon said to him, excuse me, my lord, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonderful deeds that our ancestors recounted to us, saying, did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now Yahweh has forsaken us. He's given us into the palm of Midian. So Gideon is the most anti-heroic hero there is. First he's hiding in a wine press from the enemy, and then he's critical of Yahweh and says, if Yahweh really is all that powerful, why are we in the middle of this problem? So interesting that Gideon would be selected, but nevertheless, what is it we read next? And Yahweh turned to him and said, go in this your strength, and you will deliver Israel from the palm of Midian. Did I not send you? Just to do the moral story, the moral of the story is, it doesn't matter who is being sent. If God sends them, they can do the job. It was the story with Moses, who said, who am I? I can't do that. I'm sending you, so you can do it. Same thing here with Gideon. I'm sending you, you can do it. But that aside, it is the angel of the Lord who appears to Gideon, and then it is Yahweh who speaks to Gideon. So we can see, again, the angel of the Lord and Yahweh are one in this case. And it continues on even into the time of the kings, but just prior to the time of the kings, we had Samuel. Here's an interesting one from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Now the boy Samuel was serving Yahweh in the presence of Eli. The word of Yahweh was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. And then one day, when Eli was lying in his place, now his eyes had begun to grow weak, so he was not able to see, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out, Samuel was lying in the temple of Yahweh, where the ark of God was. Then Yahweh called out to Samuel, and he said, here I am. Well, we know how this goes. Samuel thinks it's Eli calling to him. Who else is in the temple? It's just Samuel and Eli. They're the only ones around. So obviously Samuel thinks Eli was there. They weren't supposed to let that lamp of God ever go out. So I'm wondering if Samuel was specifically tasked with making sure the lamp didn't go out. Eli was too old and couldn't stay up all night. Samuel was this young guy. So Samuel is probably there, awake, to make sure the lamp doesn't go out. And in the middle of the night, he hears somebody calling him. And he thinks, of course, it's Eli. He's calling me. But it's not. And Eli just says, go back and lie down. He does that until it happens 3 times. And then Eli says, well, maybe this is something special. Maybe this is Yahweh. So if you hear this again, you just say, Yahweh, speak, and I'll listen. And sure enough, in verse 10, then Yahweh came and stood there and called out as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, because your servant is listening. Here's that critical detail in verse 10. Just like at the bottom of the ladder for Jacob, Yahweh is standing there. He has to be there in some kind of physical presence to be standing in the temple. with Samuel and calling to him in a voice that Samuel can hear. I mean, he even mistakes it for Eli for 3 times. So it's not just in his head. It's a voice that he hears in the room, and God is there standing. So this continues on. God continues that intimate relationship. I mean, all of this, I think, the point of this in the overall story arc is that God is keeping his promise that he has called Israel as a special nation that he will continue to have a relationship with and personally involve himself in Israel. Unlike all the other Gentile nations, God does not appear in this manner to the other nations. Now, God sometimes has a message for those nations, but who does he use to deliver those messages? He uses Israelites. He uses Jonah to go talk to Nineveh. He uses Elijah or Elisha to go talk to some of the neighboring nations. And one prophet that he actually sent to those other nations was Jeremiah. And now let's look at a piece from Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 9. And the word of Yahweh came to me, Jeremiah, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you came out of the womb, I consecrated you. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Then I said, Lord Yahweh, look, I do not know how to speak, for I'm a youth. But Yahweh said to me, You must not say I'm a youth. For to whomever I send you, you will go. And whatever I command you, you will speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares Yahweh. Then Yahweh stretched out his hand, and he touched my mouth. And Yahweh said to me, Look, I have put my words in your mouth. So as a kid, we would say putting words in your mouth was unsanitary. But here God is doing it. It's perfectly sanitary if God does it. God put his words in Jeremiah's mouth. But how can he lift his hand and touch Jeremiah's mouth if he doesn't have a hand? He must be there in some kind of embodied form, talking to Jeremiah as a human would talk to another human, and lifting his hand and touching his mouth. It's a conversation they're having. So Yahweh has appeared to Jeremiah. And look how Jeremiah describes it. The word of Yahweh came to me. In fact, if you look through Jeremiah, this whole passage, and then beyond chapter 1, over and over again we read, the word of Yahweh came to me, or to Jeremiah, and he spoke. So the presence of God is Yahweh. It is sometimes described as the angel of Yahweh. It is sometimes described as the word of Yahweh. We can find times in the scriptures where it says the word of Yahweh appeared to so-and-so. Here we see that suggested by the context of Jeremiah chapter 1. So, why does this matter? I think it matters because even in the Old Testament, we can see the idea that God can be both transcendent and embodied at the same time. It is within God's ability to be everywhere and one place simultaneously. And this is described in Scripture as the angel of God. And this is how they talked about it. It was only natural, of course, that when Jesus came, and especially after his ascension and after the disciples and believers in Jesus began reflecting on what Jesus said and what he did, that they naturally saw Jesus in the same kind of terms as this angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. A tangible, embodied expression of Yahweh himself, not negating the idea that God was still in heaven, still running everything, still God, transcendent, as well as God embodied. Now, I don't want us to think for a moment that the incarnation of Jesus is in any way similar to the appearances of the angel of the Lord, except in the fact that there was a tangible presence in one place and a transcendent God everywhere. Incarnation, becoming a human, is different than just appearing as a human. Appearing as a human is, doesn't change the nature or essence of God in any way, I don't think. But becoming a human, that was a different kind of thing. Incarnating himself as Jesus, as opposed to just appearing on the side of a road as a man, was a different degree entirely. And yet the same idea is that here is God. I can touch him, I can talk to him, and yet there is God, and we have terms for that. The Jews never really got around to organizing this into a coherent doctrine that they would adhere to. We call it Trinitarianism. We say the Father, the Jesus, and the Spirit are all God, and yet distinct persons within the Godhead. We have a way of articulating it, thanks in large part due to the debates among Christians in the 200s and 300s AD, when they were trying to sort all this out, and they came down to a statement that they could agree on, and which we call Trinitarianism. But the idea is that this idea that God could be both in one place and everywhere at the same time was not a new idea in the New Testament. It's a continuation of an idea that started in the Old Testament. And look in the New Testament at the phrases that we have. Like at the beginning of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So how do we have something called the Word that is both God himself and yet also with God? Could that not be hearkening all the way back to Jeremiah? The word of the Lord, the word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah. It was God, but somehow distinct because it was there with Jeremiah in a tangible way. And down a little bit further in John chapter 1, verse 14, and the Word became flesh and took up residence among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the one and only from the Father, full of grace and truth. So here is the Word becoming a concrete flesh person who lives with us in Jesus. And in fact, the New Testament writers, like Paul, even see Jesus, maybe that angel of the Lord was a kind of embodiment of Jesus before the incarnation. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 through verses 4 through 5, all of these ancient Israelites after the Exodus, they all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the same spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. But God was not pleased with the majority of them, for they were struck down in the desert. Now, I'm not going to try to parse out the exact imagery of the rock that he's talking about. Of course, we know Moses struck a rock and there was water that came from there, and they drank from that. That's probably part of this illusion. But what I want to draw on the point is that from Paul's perspective, Jesus was involved in the Exodus. Jesus was there and part of that process. And Jude, for such a short book, it has a lot to say about different concepts that we're looking at. But in Jude, we read this. I want to remind you, although you know everything once and for all, that Jesus, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, the second time destroyed those who did not believe. So like Paul, Jude is placing Jesus at the Exodus. He is the one that saved the people out of the land of Egypt. I mean, could be echoing the way Judges put it. The angel of the Lord took them out of Egypt. And here Jude says, it was Jesus. Jesus was part of this process. I'm going to end with a quote from Dr. Heiser, not from the supernatural book. This quote is actually taken from the longer book, The Unseen Realm. But the point that this idea that God could somehow be embodied and transcended at the same time wasn't a new idea for the New Testament writers. It was something the Jews had believed normally before Christ, and even after for a while. He says this in The Unseen Realm, Dr. Heiser. There are two Yahweh figures in the Old Testament thinking, one invisible, the other visible and human in form. Judaism, before the first century, the time of Jesus, knew this teaching. That's why ancient Jewish theology once embraced two Yahweh figures, which Dr. Heiser says is called the two powers. But once this teaching came in to involve the risen Jesus of Nazareth, Judaism could no longer tolerate it. So the rejection of this idea that there could be an invisible, transcendent Yahweh and a visible Yahweh, and yet they both be the same Yahweh, that was just too much like Christian thinking for them after Christ. Before Christ, they talked about it, they discussed it. What could it mean that we have Yahweh as an angel and Yahweh beyond all perception at the same time? How is that possible? They talked about it, they discussed it, they believed that there was truth in it. But after Jesus came and lived it, and the Christians said, this is what that means, this is the perfection of that idea, the Jews rejected it because it was too much like Christ. But the truth is, it's the truth. It's really what it is. Jesus could be Yahweh, and the Father could be Yahweh simultaneously, and that's just the way it is. Mind-blowing though it may be, it is the truth. All right, so we're going to continue our exploration into the unseen realm next week. Here are a couple of related videos. The Bible Project video has one dedicated to discussing the angel of the Lord. That's the URL to go to that video. And then Dr. Heiser actually has, I think it's an hour-long video, maybe almost 2 hours long, where he discusses this idea of the two powers, and he explores how it was developed in Jewish writings before and during the time of Christ, and then rejected after the time of Christ. So there's a video on that too.